Hi, everybody. Are you ready for the television chapter? I know you are. I know you are. Get excited. Here we go. So there's some basic viewing facts from AC Nielsen. They're the main company that measures television viewing. The average is about 4 hours a day. 99% of homes have at least one TV set. And I bet if you think back to the house where you grew up, you probably had more than one also. TV's on, oh, nice typo there, 6 hours, 47 minutes a day, average. I think that will probably go down because think of, at least on our television sets here at home, they're primarily used for gaming. And when we consume television content, we're typically doing it online, either on a tablet, on our laptop, or on our phone. So the idea of sitting in front of a television to watch a particular program is kind of dying out. It's called appointment television. My family and I used to have that for The Walking Dead. We would get together on Sundays and watch The Walking Dead. It was appointment TV. Appointment TV doesn't really exist anymore because now we can watch whatever we want, whenever we want. So I feel like this number will most likely go down. I might be wrong. 70% of daycares use TV. Of course they do. And the average kid spends 1,500 hours watching TV. I'm not one that says television is bad. I think it's a lot like YouTube. There's not all screen time is equal. Some screen time is fantastic. Some is trash. You want to have a balanced diet, right? Just like the food. So your book says television is the most influential media since the printing press. I think that the internet has usurped that, but up till this point, television was the biggie. Yeah. So let's talk about the history a little bit. Does this guy have the greatest name ever? Philo Farnsworth. He was from Idaho. He transmitted the first TV picture electronically. Of course, it was the dollar sign. We should have known. And he patented the first TV in 1930, and that's what it looked like. You see, it's this huge cabinet with a little tiny screen. And there's Philo on the right. So early TV programs typically only had one sponsor. So instead of the news, for example, it was the Camel News Caravan, and Camel Cigarettes sponsored the entire program. Now, networks in the 50s wanted to move on to longer programs, maybe an hour's worth of programs. Well, sponsors didn't want to cough up that much money. So then television made the jump to, instead of one sponsor, having many sponsors. So if you think about, like, the Super Bowl has a gazillion sponsors, and not just the commercials that are shown during the commercial breaks, but the halftime show is typically sponsored by Pepsi. There's like the Tostitos pregame, you get it. So now there's loads of sponsors for television programs when it used to just be one. Your book brings up an interesting piece of trivia that from 48 to 52 in cities that had TV signals, theater attendance went down, library books weren't checked out as often, restaurant reservations went down. So people were being entertained visually at home for the first time. They didn't have to leave their house. So quiz shows were the most popular in the 1950s. I think, like, Jeopardy is still popular now. I think that we all kind of play along, right? One of the interesting stories that's mentioned in your book is about Charles Van Doren. If you've seen the Robert Redford movie Quiz Show, it's about this scandal. Charles Van Doren was a pretty charismatic guy, and he was on a quiz show, and he continued to win. Well, as he was winning, because he was charismatic and pretty telegenic, apparently, although you can't tell by that picture, the ratings were going up. So the producer started feeding him the answers so that he would stay the winner and the ratings would continue to go up. So this was like the first time that that Americans were duped or punked, right? It's a great movie, actually, if you get a chance. So the golden age of television is the late 50s, mainly because the network still ran everything, ABC, NBC, and CBS, and there wasn't a whole lot of competition. So sketch comedy was big. Now, there's really not much sketch comedy anymore except for Saturday Night Live. That's basically the only one that's still around. Variety shows were also huge, and the biggest one was Ed Sullivan. And the Ed Sullivan Show, of course, is super famous for for introducing the Beatles. This was the first time the Beatles were on the television in the United States. So a variety show, I guess Ellen is close to a variety show. Like, there's different parts, right? But they're not nearly as prevalent now as they were in the 50s, sketch shows and variety shows. So sitcoms, and this is in your book, it's interesting that the production of sitcoms and the sitcoms presented actually represent changes in our culture. So for example, this is the Mary Tyler Moore Show. She was the first woman in television to be represented as single with a job. And it was a big deal. It was a big deal. And also the definition of family changed, right? As the nuclear, quote unquote, nuclear family was not as common as before. People started viewing the ones they worked with as their family. And that was represented in shows like MASH, Cheers, and of course, Friends. So it expanded the idea that you could have a quote unquote family that you weren't necessarily related to. And that represented a lot of what was going on in the United States at the time. Now there's two kinds of dramas. There's chapter dramas and serial dramas. Now a serial is one that you have to watch from the beginning. So for example, you can't start watching Breaking Bad season 4, episode 3. You got to start at the beginning, right? Because it builds. Every episode builds on itself. That's a serial program. Serial programs are really the most popular to be produced because it pulls us in and we want to keep watching. And now we have the technology that we can go back and start from the beginning if we want to. A chapter show is a drama that is basically self-contained, that the story is self-contained in one particular episode. And CSI is an example of that. Most reruns that we see on television are actually stripped, which means they're not shown in the original order. Now, really good shows are often hybrids of several genres. So instead of just being, a news magazine, it might be several genres at once. And my favorite example of this is The Office. And if you think about it, it is a sitcom. It's kind of a soap opera. Their sketch comedy, because their cold opens are all pieces of sketch comedy. It's filmed like a reality show or a documentary, right? And I think that now we are such sophisticated television content consumers that we need our programs to really represent more than just one genre. I think that that's really what makes a program successful, is if it has something for everyone. So what are some sitcom trends? I can tell you what my absolute favorite trend is, and that is the lack of a laugh track. I hate the laugh track. I hate it with every fiber of my being because I think it's insulting. That's the producer saying, we don't think you know that this is funny, and so we're going to put the laugh track in here so you know when to laugh. And they insert the laugh track at times where nothing's funny. You want to see something creepy, and we'll do this in class, if we're still meeting in class by the time we get to this chapter. Watch an episode on YouTube of, oh my gosh, Big Bang Theory without the laugh track. It's so awkward. You could also see really creepy movies like Silence of the Lambs where they have inserted a laugh track, which is also creepy. I'm just really happy that sitcoms have trended away from the 3 cameras in a studio with an audience filming. I think they feel more grown up. I don't know. So the #1 genre on TV today, ta-da, reality shows. Not a surprise. Now, there's kind of a which came first, the chicken or the egg kind of thing, because reality shows are the #1 genre, but maybe it's because there's so much reality television on. And the reason that there's so much on is that it's so cheap to produce. So let's talk about an episode of The Bachelor, for example. What do the producers have to pay for? Like, they rent a fancy house somewhere in California. The women all bring their own clothes. So you don't have a wardrobe guy or woman. You don't have a makeup or hair person. You don't have I guess you could have a caterer. I don't know. It doesn't look like those women eat very much. You don't have a script writer, supposedly. I mean, well, think about it. Survivor. You don't even have to feed them, right? So it's super, super cheap to produce a reality show.
You can do a whole season of The Bachelor for like what one episode of Law and Order costs. Okay, think about House Hunters International. You need a camera, or Teen Mom, for example. You just need a camera crew and a boom operator and an editor, and bam, you've got a reality show. It's really interesting how cheap these can be to produce, and I think that's why we have so much of them and why we watch them. The decline of the network era happened because of two reasons: cable and the VCR. Because of those two innovations, we were no longer limited to just watching ABC, NBC, or CBS, and we could watch programs when we wanted. That was huge. It was huge. Something magical happened in August of 1982 at my house. We got cable. This is what our cable, our channel changer looked like. We had a remote one too because it had a 10-foot cord. That's what remote meant then. But the big thing, of course, was MTV, and we talked a little bit about this in Chapter 1 about narrowcasting. And now every cable channel is a narrowcasted channel. They're not going for the largest audience, they're going for their particular audience, so it makes it easier for advertisers to reach them. Couple things to know about just the nuts and bolts of television production. If you want to go into television, most likely you aren't going to work for a network. You'll probably work for a production company that produces content and then sells that to the networks. The below-the-line costs are like the hardware, the crew, the lights, the set, the catering. Above-the-line costs, the way you remember that is above the line starts with A, and so does actors. So the talent is mainly the above-the-line cost. So if you think about it, a reality show is mainly just below the line costs. Very little above the line costs. I mean, I guess you have to pay the host, right? But a program like Friends, for example, their last season, each one of them I think was getting $1.6 million per episode. So that meant that the above the line cost for their production company was huge. Deficit financing means that sometimes a production company will go into debt to produce several episodes of a show knowing that it will become profitable later. So shows mainly make money through syndication. And once your program hits 100 episodes, you are primed for syndication. What that means is that other networks will buy old versions of your show. It's reruns, essentially, is what it is. So reruns is another name for off-network syndication. So I'm using The Office as an example because they were originally aired on NBC, but now you could see reruns on TBS. So that's off-network syndication. And if your show is syndicated, you still get paid as like the writer or performer. You still get checks for that, residual checks. So that's where the money is. Now, first run syndication is a little different than off-network. And I've got Ellen here as an example, Wheel of Fortune as an example, Jeopardy as an example, where the shows are produced in one particular place, like Ellen is produced at Warner Brothers in California. Now that Warner Brothers then will sell her show to anybody that wants it. So like when The Office was on, it was on 8 o'clock Thursday nights, right? On the NBC affiliates. But Ellen can be on at 9 o'clock on the ABC channel in Chicago, 10 o'clock on the CBS channel in New York, because it's syndicated. So when Warner Brothers will sell that to whoever wants it. Okay. Fringe is the term for the show that comes before and after prime time. So here in the Central Time Zone, our prime time programming is 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. So networks will typically want to put a really valuable show around 6:30 because then they think that we won't change the channel. And it's so interesting too because this all just seems so archaic now because we stream everything whenever we want. Evergreen is a term for a television show that will probably be around forever. Seinfeld is pretty dated these days, but it's still going to be on reruns forever. So is the Andy Griffith Show, and so of course is The Simpsons. I think The Office might fall into that category too, but Evergreen is pretty easy to remember. It just represents any show that really people never get sick of. Now, you've probably heard of television ratings. I want to make sure that you also understand the difference between rating and a share. A rating essentially means 1.1 million households. So if a program gets a 3 rating, it's about 3.5 million households watched it. Doesn't mean, I got to take that back, doesn't mean they watched it. It just means that it was on at their house, okay? Now, a share is the percentage of TVs tuned in during a specific time. So, for example, maybe the Summer Olympics, the Olympic opening ceremonies might have a 50 share, meaning that of every television that is tuned in at that point, 50% of them were watching the Olympics. Right? Ratings and shares used to be much bigger than they are now because there were fewer options. So a rating now that's successful is going to be much lower than one that was successful 20 years ago because we didn't have options. There's a lot of competition for television now. A couple effects of television that we're going to talk about is definitely the politics. The very first televised debate was in September 1960, Richard Nixon and John F. Kennedy. Kennedy came across very, very well on television, and so what that meant is that people who watched the debate thought that Kennedy won, but people who listened on the radio thought that Nixon won. And what this did was demonstrate to politicians how important it is to come across well on TV. You have to be telegenic now in order to break into politics here, at least national politics here in the United States. You have to be telegenic. And it was a significant moment because Kennedy was very tan, and Nixon, I think I heard he had a fever or something, and they offered to put makeup on him, and he said no. And he probably should have said yes. But no one knew then that politics on television were going to change everything. So is TV making us smarter? I say yes, and here's why. There's something called the sleeper curve. Now, think about Game of Thrones. How many different plots were happening in Game of Thrones at a time? A lot. Okay. In the 70s and 80s, shows like Starsky and Hutch or The Love Boat maybe had 2 plot lines going at the same time. Maybe. Now, we have television that's called lean forward TV. You have to pay attention. You can't do a crossword puzzle while you're watching Breaking Bad. You have to pay attention. That's called the sleeper curve. That shows today are much more complicated. And so we have to pay attention. I think it's making us smarter in a weird way. So we're going to talk about this in class too, but the most watched TV prime times ever. This is a link. It's really interesting to see the ratings. Most of them are Olympics and Super Bowls. Okay, so we just went through a huge amount of television history in 17 minutes. So look forward to seeing y'all in class. Maybe if I ever turn this off.